Hello, friends, Logos users, and anybody who's not a user just yet, and just here to check out this conversation with Dr. Lydia Jaeger. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm extremely excited. We'll get to her, there it is, her book in a moment. We'll be talking about Ordinary Splendor, but first I want to make sure we address the guests in the room. Dr. Lydia Jaeger, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for your invitation.
Of course, of course. For anybody who's tuning in now live, I want to make sure you have a moment to share with us where you're watching from. Also, let us know if you are a Logos user, of course, and if you've yet picked up the translation of Dr. Jaeger's book, Ordinary Splendor. If not, we'll be dropping a link in the comments so you can learn more about it. But I think we normally do a lengthy bio, but I'm going to actually have Dr. Jaeger expand on her experience after we get rolling. But for those who have who need a little bit of context who Dr. Jaeger is, we'll start with a bit of an introduction. So Dr. Jaeger has dedicated her career to navigating the convergence of science, faith, and philosophy. As a lecturer and academic advisor at Nogent, did I say that correct? Nogent Bible Institute, and author of, I think there's 7, maybe 8 books now. Books like What the Heavens Declare and Einstein, Polanyi, and the Laws of Nature. Jaeger continues to push boundaries, challenge conventional thought, and inspire readers and students alike. I'll add that she does this in a practical way that's very helpful and very exciting, engaging to read through. But if you're seeking to dive deeper into these complex, fascinating intersections of thought, Jaeger's body of work is an exceptional place to start. So I would like to unpack that a little bit more and hear more about your career. If we could start there, Dr. Jaeger, can you share a bit about your personal journey and how you arrived at your current role as lecturer and academic advisor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, I had the privilege to grow up in a Christian home, and I got interested in mission work very early on. And my main call is to mission work. And I went to France, in fact, because as an answer to mission call, I'm German, and I had done physics at the University of Cologne. And then I moved to France in order to do my theology, because I wanted to live in a foreign country and be more knowledgeable of the language as well, without having right away the responsibility of being a missionary. And so I wasn't thinking of France at that time as my mission field, but at the end of my theological studies, so I explored different options, mainly thinking at that time about French-speaking Africa. And the door which opened, and which really opened at the right time and corresponded to my gifts and were confirmed by people who are fellow Christians who were praying and thinking with me through this time. So the door which opened was at the Nogent Bible Institute, which is just outside of Paris. And then I realized that God's call to mission work was to France and to this mission field there. And I've been teaching there from 1995 on.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I'm excited, but I'm a little intimidated. I think that you have just an array of perspective to add to the church. And so I'm excited for today's conversation with the background and philosophy, but your heart for the church at the same time. So from, I think, is it 8 books that you've published? Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't think it's 8. In fact, so if we were speaking of books I authored,
Sure.
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 perhaps. Yeah, 6. I have just the list here. So I think it's more closer to 6 books. In recent years, I've become more and more interested in collaborative projects.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my work over the last decade, even longer than that, has been more in editing books than in a single authored books.
They've been translated. I think, and so like
Yeah.
Ordinary Splendor, I think has been translated into 3, maybe 4 languages. And so maybe that's where I'm crossing up a
Yeah.
bit. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's part of what part of working in an interdisciplinary area.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to move in between the world of science, both the natural and human sciences, and then philosophy and theology. And I don't have the competence to just cover all this ground on my own. So I'm very interested in collaborative projects as well. But yeah, this book, Ordinary Splendor, is single authored.
Yeah. Yeah. So from the first book to this one, how has your writing progressed and your interest in what you publish and what you collaborate on?
So this book, Ordinary Splendor, in fact, the French edition, is one of my earlier books. So not the first one. In fact, I wrote it at the end of my PhD, and I had already had the opportunity to publish my master thesis. So this was not my first book, but from there on, in fact, the journey from this book onward has been that kind of Ordinary Splendor is kind of the groundwork for whatever I've done since then, because it's about the doctrine of creation.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, looking more into the practical aspect. So much of what I've been doing has been more than on the scientific aspects itself. For example, I edited a book on, 2 books, in fact, on creation and evolution. One on the general question of evolution, and the other was on the question of the historical Adam. But science, even if we're not talking about evolution, it's just whenever you do natural sciences, obviously the doctrine of creation is very central. And in terms of, more practical thinking, the doctrine of creation is also very central, and it's basic. And whenever I address a topic, I try to do it in this 3-tiered way of creation, sin, and redemption. And I think it's very often very, very illuminating. So whatever topic you have, just to see through this lens of creation, sin, of redemption, and then creation is always the foundation of it.
Mm-hmm. I think I even saw this in the table of contents of Ordinary Splendor. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it seemed like there was that 3-tier. Well, there's a lot more tiers, but that was the progression from beginning to end. But so has the work that you've done there at the university or the institute, has that contributed to the work that you did in Ordinary Splendor, or was that, I think you were there 15 years now, is that right, at the institute?
No, nearly 30 years now. So I started in 1995. So the French edition of this book was published in 2007. In fact, the story behind the book is that I had been doing my PhD alongside teaching, in fact, at the Bible College. So I had the chance of first doing my master in philosophy alongside my teaching there, and then doing the PhD while teaching, and even while being already academic dean at the college. So from 1999 to 2005. And when I came up to the end of my PhD, our principal at that time, he asked me to speak at a retreat day, for a spiritual retreat day for our staff on my PhD. And I told him, but nobody will be interested to listen to a PhD summary in philosophy of science. I had been working on the concept of laws of nature and in the contemporary debate in philosophy of science, and the role religious presuppositions play in this role. And I just told him, oh no, it's not worthwhile for a spiritual retreat. And then he told me, but if it's not worthwhile for the ordinary Christian, then why did you spend 6 years of your life, even part-time, on this project? There must be something of interest in there. And yeah, and especially if it's your principle, you can't just say, no, I'm not going to do it. So I had to accept the challenge. Still, I didn't give a summary of my PhD, but I started to think kind of alongside the topics of my PhD and the doctrine of creation. And this really got me on a journey, I would say, which in the end led to this book.
Yeah. I can see that. Having journeyed through. Before we get into the book itself, I want to read an endorsement by Dr. Van Hooser, who I respect. And this was, we don't normally do this, but I thought this is such a great way to summarize some of the points in the book here. So I just want to read part of the endorsement here. And then for those who are watching, we're going to dig in and start talking about the content of this book. And so Van Hooser said here, Ordinary Splendor, here is a doctrine of creation that focuses, rightly in my opinion, less on origins than on ongoings, namely the practical consequences of our createdness for everyday human existence. Jaeger argues convincingly that human flourishing in every aspect of our lives depends entirely on living in dependence on God and along the grain of the created order. So I'll finish here. Ordinary Splendor confirms Calvin's belief that there is no knowledge of what it is to be human without knowledge of God the Creator. So I have a quote to read in closing from your book itself that, man, that is just the idea. That is just I feel like the principal point of your entire book is that connectedness to the Creator that we have. So what is the primary catalyst or inspiration behind writing Ordinary Splendor? So what is the one thing that you'd like your readers to get? Is it in line with what Van Hooser and I were just saying there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So when I think Christians and non-Christians hear the word creation, they immediately think about evolution. And so, well, what they think about the scientific, if it's against, if you can combine it, so whatever. But there is so much more in the doctrine of creation. So it's on the opening page of the Bible. And what is the sad thing about the creation evolution? Well, there are many sad things, but one of the sad things of the creation evolution controversy is that then Christians and non-Christians, in fact, will just ignore creation. I think this is a hard issue. I don't want to get into this trouble, and therefore I just leave it there. But if creation is on the first page of the Bible, it's the very foundation on which to build. And I would say nothing makes sense in the world, and nothing makes sense in the Bible and in the Christian worldview without creation. And so I really want to, in this book, I want to draw out the consequences of this. At least, yeah, not all the consequences, because there are many, but really the consequences for our ordinary life, for our daily life. So what difference does it make in my life that I believe that God is the creator of the world, that God created me? So it's a very personal question. And I think it makes a lot of difference, and many Christians aren't aware of it. And therefore I think don't know how to serve and live before God and to live for His glory.
Why do you think it's so important that no matter what role you serve in the church or what role you have in the church, it's important to have an understanding of creation? Why do you think it's so important?
You can just look at a couple of New Testament passages and see how the doctrine of creation plays out in very practical contexts. So whenever Paul addresses a non-Jewish audience, he starts with creation.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't have to start from creation for a Jewish origin, for a Jewish audience, because they already know that God is the creator. But whenever he addresses a pagan audience, he starts from creation, which really means that the gospel doesn't make sense, and you can't preach the gospel if you don't know that this is the good news about the creator. So it's a very important creation whenever you are confronted with non-Christian religious views, or say atheistic views. And then, for example, in the first epistle to the Corinthians, the doctrine of creation comes back, both in sexuality, and in questions related to food. And so Paul says at one point to the Corinthians, do whatever you do, so eat and drink, or whatever you do it to the glory of God. And I just don't think that you can do this. You just don't know what it means to eat and drink to the glory of God if you haven't thought about creation.
Mm-hmm.
And too much of our teaching, I think, is rather withdrawn from the ordinary, from the daily lives of Christians. So you're, in a certain sense, you're a Christian in church. You're a Christian when it comes perhaps to, at least I hope so, when it comes to the gospel news, even if there you can have sometimes some doubts today. But how to be a Bible-believing Christian, and say at your workplace, at your eating table, in your family relationships, in your marriage. So that's and their unique creation.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to creation. It goes back to original design. So I'd love to talk a bit about this interdisciplinary approach that you bring to creation, specific to your philosophy background. So there are quotes and anecdotes or stories like throughout your entire book of philosophers and even Greek mythology. And then theologians. Can you share about the challenges and rewards of this approach? Anything that you'd like to share there?
I think one of our problems when we read the Bible is that we are just so used to what the Bible is saying. And sometimes we need, I would say, kind of a contrast. We need to compare to other texts, and then to realize how unique it is. Because in a certain sense, if you only know the Bible and say the kind of biblical worldview or Christian worldview, it just, many things seem normal to us. In fact, not even Christians, even non-Christians. So when many Western atheists talk about human rights as something like self-evident, if you moved, for example, to a Hinduistic setting, then you realize that the very idea that all humans are equal is something which is not obvious, and which comes even historically, which comes from Genesis 1, from so all humans, men and women, all social classes, etc., created in the image of God. It's a very revolutionary idea. But you only realize that it's revolutionary when you step a little bit out of your context, go either to other cultures, or if you compare it to other literatures. For example, in that case, the ancient Near Eastern literature about creation, and then you realize how different, in fact, the text of Genesis 1 is in particular. It's about this topic and about many other topics. It's not polytheistic. There's just one God, and he creates by his word with no resistance. He creates a world of order, which is a very influential idea in science. Even there, the very idea that there are laws of nature, it seems obvious to us today, but it's a very unique idea linked to biblical monotheism. So I really, in my own experience and also in teaching, I think it's interesting to compare the biblical stories with other stories, with other explanations of the world and of humans, and then to realize how unique the biblical story is.
Those seem like they add insight. Were there challenges? Would you ever come across challenges where it's difficult to, maybe you read church or not a church, an ancient philosopher, and you're like, well, this really doesn't gel with the way that I thought. This really doesn't fit with the way that Scripture talks about creation, for example. Were there challenges that you came across?
Certainly, because they often make you think twice. I must, and probably it depends on who you are and what kind of challenges are more difficult. So I would say in my case, it's more from modern philosophers perhaps than from ancient philosophy. But it really depends on who you are and what your, what ideas in a certain sense are perhaps sensitive for you. Or, But in any case, you have to think twice, and you have really to, in a certain sense, to see, okay, so this is different. Can I accept it perhaps? Can I accommodate it? Because the Bible is not just opposite to all human wisdom. Yeah, we even say, if you look in the book of Proverbs, it openly acknowledges other sources. But it also helps you to see the uniqueness of the Bible. And I'm always thrilled when I can see how it makes a difference compared to other. What you.
So your book actually walks through a number of, I don't know if philosophically you'd call them principles, but ideas. There's dignity, there's sexuality, there's in a sense. And so I'd like to just jump to 2 different chapters, and I'd start with reading a quote from your book. But understanding human dignity is the chapter I'd like to just understand more from getting to sit and talk with you. And so understanding human dignity in the context of God's creation. So on page 60, I'm going to read through a quote. Human beings are the result of the Creator's deliberate plan. They're not an accident of history, lost in the unblinking vastness of a hostile universe. No, God purposely resolved to create us. Let us make man in our image, from Genesis 1:26. The second creation account even shows God working with his hands to form the first man. As a result, we can be sure that God wants us to exist. So trustingly commit ourselves to the plan that our Creator has wrought for humanity. So my question was, can you share a bit about the insights readers can expect from this chapter, Understanding Human Dignity?
It's a very important issue, and it links to many ethical questions, bioethical questions as well. So how do we define humans? Are humans defined by some capacities, for example, rational capacities? Then there are humans who don't qualify as persons. Say people who are mentally impaired, or perhaps end-of-life issues, etc. So understanding that our human dignity is not in ourselves, in our capacity. So the Genesis doesn't define humans as having this kind of differences. So certain capacities different from animals, for example. But it defines humans by being in the image of God. So, which I think includes certain capacities, specific capacities. I'm not saying that there is nothing different in terms of capacities between animals and humans, but the very defining point is that we are in the image of God and therefore called into a relationship, and that our dignity also resides in this relationship. So it's not something we have to achieve or we have to prove. Then, so this insight, you can link it also to the question, what is a worthwhile life? So how do I define my identity and my value? Is it by my work? Is it by what I achieve? Or even is it the number of children I have, or my income, etc.? So the the text of Genesis says us, no, it's nothing of all this. Our identity is in God, and we are all created in God's image.
That's
And
beautiful.
this is a given, and we can just live from there. Then we have a call. So I remember it's a missionary who worked, I think, in Central Africa and then in Madagascar, and she worked in in kind of helping local communities to take care of their own, and really to not to just look to outside help in order to change the situation. And she told us that it was very important when she taught this lesson that everybody is created in God's image and therefore called by God to be king, and therefore can make a difference in their environment. They are not just victims, and can really make a difference by their action. Just give one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You do this throughout the entire book. You just kind of shed this sort of practical everyday life application to the creation idea. And I've one more I kind of want to ask you about, and that's accepting your limits. Mm-hmm. So how does recognizing and accepting our limits affect our understanding of creation and our place in it?
Yeah, as far as I can remember, I got started on this subject by listening to a song by a French rock singer. So it's not my favorite music, but a student of mine had pointed out to me this CD, and Jean-Jacques Goldman has very good texts, in fact. And so one of the songs was on living 100 lives. And when you compare this kind of, this idea that you want to live 100 lives, so in a certain sense, I can really relate to this. I want to pack into my time the most I can, and have many relationships and do different things, etc. And it's a kind of frustration to realize, okay, my time is limited, and I have to accept that I'm in a certain place, and that I'm a certain person, and I can't do all what I want to do. So there are so many interesting things to do in this world. And so many interesting people to meet. But then to realize that what can be frustrating is in fact part of being a creature. So it's part of not being God. God is omnipresent. God can be in all places at the same time, and he can be in a relationship with all human beings at the same time. But we can't. And this is good, because if this is linked to our creation, this is not a frustration, but it's good. So there are limits which are good. There are other limits which aren't. So limits coming from death, limits coming from discrimination, for example, or from illness. So I'm not saying that we just accept kind of fatalistic every limit we have. So it's part of being humans also to push our limits. But we don't have to rebel against God's good creation, and being limited is fundamentally good. So my body is in a certain place, and it's of a certain shape. I'm coming from a certain family. I'm not coming I'm not coming from different families, but also, there are different families joining in my family, but so in my family tree, but I have a specific place also in history. And in my case, I'm a woman, so other a man. And this, once again, it's part of God's good creation. I don't have to try and be everything at the same time, and to rebel against the place which God has given to me. And so I can just learn to glorify God in the place where I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if that's not an applicable message for anybody living in today's day and age, where you could be wrapped up in any number of things at one time. I feel like we're being beckoned all the time with emails and calendars and social media and all the things. And it's okay to be right where you are. And it's good to be finite, which was something great to think through. That's new for me. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I have so many questions, but we only have so much time, so our time is finite. Can you share any specific biblical passages or stories that may have jumped out at you or were especially influential to you while writing this book? Like, what spoke to you, Dr. Jaeger, while you were working through this?
Yeah, obviously Genesis. So I'm always
Mm-hmm.
coming back to the Genesis text. So I told you the start of the book, which was in this spiritual retreat day, and then I decided to go further or to deepen my reflection on this through a sermon series I did in my local church. And I started out to preach on Genesis, and just by bits, I think probably 8 sermons perhaps. And so normally I preach once a month, so I'm part of a team. And it was probably spread over perhaps 2 years, something like this. And I realized that at the end of the time, the audience seemed kind of bored. So in the sense that they wanted to move on. So I thought, okay, I really have to stop now and do something else. But I wasn't bored at all. I thought I can continue. There are so many different facets, so many insights you can get out of these texts, that I would want to continue. But yeah, sure, I changed for other subjects. There's more to the Bible than just the first 3 chapters. But yeah, obviously these are the founding chapters of the Bible, and of the book, especially the 2. So, and I teach in our college the course on the doctrine of creation and sin, and redemption as well. But and whenever I teach the part of on creation, I tell my students, just allow us for a couple of hours to live in an ideal world. So don't come always and ask me what complications sin brings in. We have to talk about this, and there is something of this in the book Ordinary Splendor, because we live in a mad creation. Obviously, we can't just abstract this, but I think it's good in our thinking to go back to the original plan and not always stay with sin, but really go back to creation, and allow ourselves to be, in delight before God's creation, God's good creation.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to read one more quote and then ask a question while we start to bring our time together to a close. So it's towards the end of your book. You write, from religion to work, from procreation to diet, from marriage to science, no aspect of humanity what humanity is or does is unaffected by the worldview found in Scripture. Despite the number of subjects we have considered, this study has hardly claimed to be exhaustive. Many other worthy themes have been left untouched. However, it's time to draw the study of origin accounts to a provisional conclusion and leave for another day the joy of unearthing yet more hidden treasures from these ancient texts. So what would you say you hope that readers of your book is their most influenced, what do they walk away with when they close your book?
I really do hope that they get the message that creation is central, and that they start thinking about their lives, about what they do in this perspective. And therefore go beyond this dichotomy between, say, sacred and secular. Which our society tries to push on us as well. So it's fine. You can believe whatever you believe in your private heart, in your church. That it's perfectly okay. But don't come along and tell us that this has something to do with, say, with society at large, with my life, with how I live. And so, and I think many Christians, in fact, buy into this dichotomy. So serving God is doing something in church, but I can serve God in my workplace. In fact, I should do my work in a way that it glorifies God. And I remember at one when I taught at a church retreat on this subject, at one point I said that if you can't do your profession to the glory of God, then you should better change your job. And then afterwards, somebody came up to me, and then I think I gave an example of the tobacco industry. And then she came up to me and said, "Oh, but I have a shop and I sell tobacco. Should I stop it?" And then we had a very good discussion over half an hour. And she explained me why she did this and what the reason was for this. And obviously, the subject is much more complicated. Why she did this was just the idea was not that she wanted people to get ill, but I thought, okay, so now she's really relating her faith with her everyday life and facing hard questions. And I didn't tell her you have to sell your shop and do something else, but I thought it was important that she accepted to think through her daily life from the perspective of from her faith and therefore from creation.
Yeah, there's so many elements from creation, like being commissioned or being given purpose. You also talked about authority. You talked about there's so many different elements to that if you'd sit and camp out on it for an hour or two or a month-long sermon series, to let that kind of roll into all aspects of your life, your vocation, your family, your hobbies, it is a powerful, it is a humbling and powerful thought too. Do you have another either collaborative project or another book or project on the horizon that you're working on right now?
Right now, I'm editing a book with a friend and colleague of mine, Rachel Vaughan, who by the way, is the wife of the translator of this book, Jonathan Vaughan, who is a colleague of mine, mathematician and theologian, who translated this book, and I think marvelously translated the book and added, in fact, the opening prayer. And so Rachel Vaughan, his wife, we are working on a book on virtues. So I'm part of a network of evangelical scientists, le réseau des scientifiques évangéliques. And so we did study days during 3 years on the topic of virtues in science. And we're now bringing together the different texts and hoping to publish the book probably early next year.
Yeah, I'm excited for that also. I'll be watching for that. Where can I or others look for the work that you're putting out? Do you have a website or any social handles or anything like that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I have a website where you can find at least the titles of all my publications. And
Great.
If it's not under copyright, you will even find the full texts. Or sometimes for the books, perhaps a sample chapter and where you can buy it as well.
Great. We'll be sure to include that website in the comments. And we're also covering creation all month long at the Logos blog, word by word. And so we have guest writers, and I'll actually be writing a book review of Ordinary Splendor. So we'll be featuring that. So I get to spend some more time thinking through it. It's mostly written actually at this point, but so I'm excited about that being published. But we have other interviews on creation, the topic of creation as well this month. And so, I just wanted to close by making sure I say thank you so much, Dr. Jaeger, for the time, not only for this interview, but the time and attention that you're giving to creation. It's very important, not just today, but it's a very important topic for us to be spending time better understanding as believers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words. Thank you for this discussion.
Of course. Okay, thank you. And anybody who is catching this live interview or the replay, be sure to check out Dr. Jaeger's book. It's available from Lexham Press, so it's on Lexham Press's website as well as our store. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and it's until next time that we meet again. Thanks.